Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to the second Spark Innovation webinar that's a part of Reimagining July. We are incredibly excited to have you here today because it means that you are also trying to figure out what is the new normal in our schools and how do we move from surviving to thriving to now transforming. ARP ESSER gives us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reimagine our schools to transform our students' lives. A few housekeeping details before we jump into the amazing program that we have for you today. First off, my name is Tanya. I'm a fellow out of the Office of the Governor and get the great joy of working with the Department of Ed this year with ARP ESSER, and my colleague is also on the line. Maddie, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Sorry, there's a hubbub back of me. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm the assistant to the acting commissioner, and I've also been helping Tanya with all things ARP ESSER.
Amazing. So Maddie and I will operate behind the scenes and answer any questions or comments that you might put in the chat. But we hope that you use this time as like a lunch and learn, and please eat. You guys are the busiest people in the state right now. So we hope that you take this as a chance to really soak in some information and be inspired on ways that you can be using your district's funding. The last detail I wanted to share with you is this is being recorded and will be posted on the ARP ESSER webpage. I'll drop that link in the chat in here in just a moment. But enjoy and make sure that you visit that website because there's a one-page summary that they put together for you as well. With that, we will step into the background and hand it over to our two wonderful guest hosts today who are going to talk to us about expanding and amplifying equity through ESSER 2 and ARP ESSER. So how can you actually use the funding that's already in your districts and use ARP ESSER to amplify it? So I will hand it over to you two. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Tanya, and welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Ellen Stoltz, working as an external consultant for the State Department of Education, and I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Maureen Brummett, Superintendent of Schools in Newington, Connecticut. And we have a lot of information to go through today, and I'm so pleased to have Dr. Brummett here. Next slide, please.
Glad to be here too. Look forward to the discussion.
Great. So just so everybody knows where we're going in the next 28 minutes, we are going to be hearing from Dr. Brummett on how Newington Public Schools use their ESSER 2 needs assessment to identify a pathway forward. With those pathways, you'll hear the strategies that focus on equity using ESSER 2 funds. You'll also hear, as superintendents, some leadership moves that Dr. Brummett is very focused on, and that is all about coherence and fidelity. And then, of course, we'll end with a few highlights and then looking ahead to ARP ESSER. So with that in mind, next slide, please. Dr. Brummett, how did you see the needs assessment offering an opportunity to discover more about where Newington Public Schools is right now?
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share our plans with you today. We looked at our assessment as an opportunity. We already knew going in, and certainly the assessment informed us even more strongly that we had an achievement gap in Newington. It wasn't discussed much until very recently. I'm new to the district. This is only my second year, and obviously the first year and a half was COVID related, but I was concerned, very, very concerned about it. So that was one area that we knew we had to deal with. And I think concurrent to that was equity, because it was some of our marginalized groups that were doing less well on all of our measurements. And we also looked at how do we work on improving student achievement holistically? And another area we knew that we needed to improve upon was our professional learning communities. We've had the time for them, we've used them for years, but they had kind of fallen off the rails and were becoming more of a common planning time than a true discussion of problems of practice, instructional strategies, looking at formative assessments. So we have decided to really retool our PLCs, reframe them, and get them back on track. And that we do believe will be a huge lever toward raising student achievement. And concurrent with that, and utilizing the ESSER monies, we are hiring an equity and inclusion specialist. And I can tell you that we concluded interviews yesterday, and the position will really, and the person actually will really put us in a wonderful way with our staff because we've done some work through courageous conversations in the past year. And I think we've identified where we've got to learn and grow. But this particular individual has articulated through his immense, substantial background in equity and inclusion, how we can go about that. He took our strategic plan and overlaid it with an equity lens. And we couldn't be more excited about the potential for all of these changes for our district.
So next slide, please. So as we look at your hire and your hire coming up, hopefully the next slide comes up. What I'm wondering is, with that strategy to have somebody focused, are they focused district-wide, or are you targeting certain areas from your needs assessment? How do you see the implementation going forward?
Well, that's an excellent question. We looked at the data, and the data showed some significant inequities at our middle level on over-identification of certain populations, test scores that were even more disparate than at the other levels. So we decided that for starters, this equity inclusion specialist would have a heavy focus on our middle level. We also do believe, though, that this individual will focus district-wide. He will lead a committee that will help organize equity at each school, but also as a district-wide focus. And that was discussed yesterday during the interview about some of his plans to go about that, and it aligned very well with what we had in mind already. So I would say we want to start where we have our most challenge, which would be middle and to a certain extent high school, and then also make sure this individual can have an impact district-wide. And then we've got to support the work by making sure that our vision and mission is very clear. And our revised mission statement does speak to equity, and it speaks to closing the achievement gap. So it's all, the messaging is everywhere. There's no one that doesn't know that this is our focus for the next several years.
I can see your focus on coherence very clearly. Next slide, please. So with that coherence in mind, and any one of these, feel free to speak more deeply. I know you're very data focused, Dr. Brummett. So in terms of having your equity specialist, what are your expected outcomes?
Well, quite simply, we want to close our achievement gap and improve student achievement. We've got the data, we've got the baseline. Like many districts, we didn't have a great outcome from SBA. We did in certain areas, but in others not. So we have this baseline, as well as our internal assessments, our common formative assessments, about where we need to go. And my goal is going to be very clear that I want all students to grow this year. And I'm going to set a benchmark most likely at 10% from their baseline. So whether they're students that are below grade level or students that are achieving at a high level already, everyone needs to grow, and everyone is responsible for that growth, both the individual classroom teacher, the principal, and central office. We're all reading a book called Revisiting Professional Learning Communities, and in the book it really outlines everyone has a role in it, right from the teacher to the superintendent. And I think everyone needs to know we're all in this together. And as I get closer to the fall and I send out more information to staff, and we had a June PD which also helped set the table for this, but when we have convocation in about a month and a half, I will be very crystal clear about what everyone's doing at each level to move the needle forward and how we're going to go about it, and the significant supports both students and teachers will receive as a result of those goals.
Thank you, Dr. Brummett. Next slide, please. So this next strategy, I know Newington had already begun some of this work around courageous conversations. Can you talk a little bit more deeply on what you expect to see this year from your work in last year, and any comments on implementation as well?
Yes, so last year, in spite of the pandemic, we felt strongly that the equity work that we had begun had to continue, because equity was only going to be more deeply impacted by the pandemic and how each individual child was impacted given their circumstances. So we ran a book study all last year, and we had close to 60 staff members participate, and it was voluntary. It wasn't during the school day, it was after school. We asked teachers to lead some of the discussions. We used Courageous Conversations as our baseline book, but we also brought in other sources. And through that work and those conversations, which weren't easy, you know, it's not easy to talk about some biases that folks have or the clear equity gap we have when it comes to some of our achievement rates. So folks did get uncomfortable, and that is to be expected. But I think at the end of the process, people felt they had learned a lot. They knew what they wanted to do. And now we've got these 60 ambassadors that are going to be back in their schools talking about this. And the team also knew, probably toward the end of the school year, that we were going to also hire an equity inclusion specialist so that they knew they would have another champion to support their efforts. So we've got a good contingency of our staff already quite amped. And even besides that effort, we had individual schools that were doing other book studies relative to equity. They were doing some audits. For example, looking at their code of conduct. Is there anything on that code of conduct that could have an inappropriate racial reference, or just something that might not be in the best interest of all students? Looking at other publications, looking at grading practices, and really coming forward with what we need to do differently. If you can see the silver lining of the pandemic, one of the things we looked at was grading. I mean, nothing could have been more challenging during the pandemic than appropriate grading practices. And it really forced our teachers to revisit our work on mastery-based learning. And that really did carry us forward. We actually did a summer program with some of our ESSER monies, and we looked at just extrapolating the key standards that kids didn't meet in order for them to recover some credit. And we had a successful cohort of 15 students, all recovered credit in 2 weeks with the proper setup and the proper supports. So I think I'll also share that lesson learned with teachers in the fall for those that weren't involved, to show them how you can accelerate students' learning, and it doesn't have to take a whole school year. It can just be a focus on those standards in which they did not yet master. So there's a lot of good learning that we did this summer, and of course the book studies from last year all help us to realize there are some key strategies when done well that can help your students.
Exactly. Thank you. Next slide, please. And before we go to the next, your third strategy, just want to give you an opportunity, Dr. Brummet, if you have any specific areas that you want to touch on with regard to outcomes from the 60 ambassadors, anything that you see as the next level of work for Courageous Conversations.
Well, I do think, and I think this ties into all of our initiatives, but one of the things that I've taken over since I've been superintendent is evaluating all of my building principals that was previously delegated to assistant superintendent. And I think that's critical, because that gives me the opportunity to go one-on-one with each principal annually, well, many times annually, of course, to talk about what's going on at their school. Today I met with a principal and we talked about, well, what are your areas of strength and challenges as you look at next year, and how are you going to leverage your PLC work, your equity work to close those gaps. So giving me all these opportunities to have the chance to show administration the coherence of the efforts that we're trying to do. And it's gratifying when I get messaging back that when someone else meets with that same administrator, they'll say, well, we know Dr. Brummet wants us to make sure we're cognizant of our equitable practices as well as leveraging our PLCs to do the work next year. So it's getting out there that these are the expectations, and I think that's going to help us get the work done.
It sounds, Dr. Brummet, that your focus on coherence is really entwined with what you do in your own leadership moves. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. We're actually, along that line, we have a PLC operating at central office, and it's been operating for years. But again, we also didn't follow all the parameters that we should have. So we're going to use PLC time at central office to look at data, look at PLC practices district-wide as a way to inform our work. And we're also going to make that a focus of our instructional rounds this year. So when we go out to schools, we're going to observe not only some classroom practices, but also some PLC practices. So again, really showing folks, these are the priorities. These are what we feel are the moves that we need to make centrally and then at the building level to get student achievement to where it needs to be in Newington.
Thank you. Next slide, please. I know that Dr. Brummett, you've referred to the PLC model, which may be very familiar to our audience, of course. PLCs, professional learning communities, have been around for a long time. But in our discussion and relative to Dufour's new book, our most recent book, 2020, I think, can you talk a little bit more deeply about some of the things you expect to see in your PLCs that are different from what you had before?
Well, I think it helped to ground administration this summer by having them read several chapters out of the book. And we've decided just yesterday that we'll continue those discussions throughout the year and look at each chapter or section. For example, are we all looking at the 4 critical questions of a PLC? What do we want the students to learn? How will we know they've learned it? What do we do if they learn it and are ready for something more? And what do we do if they haven't learned it? So those seem like basic, straightforward questions, but sometimes they get lost in the shuffle of the day-to-day, especially last year when our biggest focus was keeping everybody safe. So now we're able to get back to that. And as I mentioned earlier, we did fall off the wagon, so to speak, and began to use PLCs last year as more of common planning time, looking at how to make online instruction engaging. So really not necessarily a bad thing. It was necessary for last year, but we've got to get people back on track. And as we go through the year, we'll talk with our principals about what climate pieces need to be in place at the school level to promote this work. What are some strategies that you can use?
1, 2, 3, 4.
We're having our PA system tested today. So my apologies. So what will you do as a leader if you observe a PLC and notice that there are things that are going awry? The book will help us with that, but also when I meet with my administrative team throughout the year, along with my central office staff who are all very much on board with this work and extraordinarily talented team, to get at those areas if things start to fall things start to fall off track a little bit, or there's a significant problem of practice that people are struggling with. We're here to help. We're here to go in there and help support it, and perhaps through our rounds visits or PLC visits, we can offer some strategies and suggestions.
So it seems, Dr. Brummett, that you have a very detailed plan going forward using these 3 strategies to address equity in Newington based on your data, and that this is something that's not just going to be September, but of course will translate through all of your leadership moves throughout the year and the leadership moves of your principals as well. Next slide, please. So before we move forward and looking at creating coherence and ARP-ESSER and looking ahead, are there any other expected outcomes that you have, not only from the PLC model, but maybe for all 3 of your strategies as one?
Well, I haven't really touched upon social emotional learning this morning yet, or this afternoon yet, and we did a lot of work on that last year, which I think was pivotal for getting us through the pandemic. And our measures that we used there through the Rethink Ed assessments showed us our kids grew a lot socially and emotionally last year. We'll continue that work. We're a district that's implementing the Ruler platform. So I do expect that.
Test 1,
I'm
2,
sorry.
3, 4.
My apologies. So how will we look at those test scores, the assessments that we use for SEL? I think that's a measurement that's also telling and shows us kids are able to learn when their social emotional needs are being met. So I do consider that sort of a part of our host of strategies that will lead us to a better successful outcome. And then I think there are things I've yet to envision relative to the work
Test
of
1,
our inclusion
2,
specialist.
3, 4.
Next slide, please. So, a lot of us that are on this call are very mindful of the work done on ESSER 2 to ensure that we are moving forward in our districts. and now looking ahead with our ARP ESSER grant applications, which we are receiving. So from your perspective, Dr. Brummett, what do you see as how ARP ESSER can help Newington Public Schools continue this deep work on advancing equity?
Well, similar to the assessment that we had to do for the other ESSER funding, I went along, my strategy in terms of the upcoming ARP ESSER funds was to meet with each administrator and our teachers, our union, our data teams. I visited data teams at the end of the year, and I basically was posing, what supports do you need from the grant, from my office, to get kids back on track in the fall? And again, publicly stating that the equity and inequity with some of our achievement was something that I was going to be very focused on. So I actually got a host of suggestions through these mini meetings that I had with everybody, and from there, and along with my central office team and their input, we have determined what positions we want to add next year using this funding to get at some of these areas raised by principals. And it turned out to be things like more EL support. We have a growing EL population here in Newington. More BCBA support. A lot of the children that came back from having been remote were struggling socially and emotionally. More support for special education students. Intervention supports. And actually a new position relative to the credit recovery that we did already start this summer, getting kids caught up much more quickly than retaking an entire course, just because they obviously didn't pass it, but it just was a matter of a few standards versus an entire full repeat of another year, you know, where the student loses another school year on the same topic. So looking at what our staff was saying, what our administrators were saying, looking at the data, of course, and getting, you know, that kind of feedback, and that really did drive how these grant monies are going to be allocated.
Excellent, excellent. I can't wait to read your application, Dr. Brummett. So next slide, please. Just for the general population here, I know you and I have spoken earlier, obviously. Is there anything that you would like to highlight or celebrate about the Newington Public Schools? Any data that you're seeing or trends that you're seeing that you would like to just offer to our audience?
Well, I have failed to mention that I do have tremendous Board of Education support. I've presented all this to them with regard to equity, with regard to closing the achievement gap, with regard to looking at our data and being very transparent about it. And to have the Board of Education support is extremely important. But another thing that we did just this week as we started to unpack our SBA data is we found that there were teachers who, in spite of the pandemic, had some of the best results they've had in their career. So I have asked the principals of those teams to help me understand what those teams did to be that successful, because arguably, I'm thinking most of the state probably didn't see a lot of that, and we certainly didn't see it district-wide, but we saw it pockets. So I'm looking at all those pockets to determine what can we take away from that, because these teachers had probably the most adverse conditions they've had of their entire career. Everyone went through, some of the kids that had to be quarantined, the whole COVID experience, but yet their kids scored at very high levels. And how do we explain that? How do we use that to drive and leverage what those teachers did and move forward? So I've got a couple of key examples that I'm going to unpack with the principals, and I'm going to spotlight those. And that's another strategy I intend to use throughout the school year is, here's some things that are working well. You may want to take a look at this, and you know, whether it's a teacher team functioning, a particular strategy that a teacher's using, all of these things are going to be celebrated and highlighted. And that's actually something that is mentioned specifically in the PLC book that I've referenced. You know, celebrating when you see something really work well and giving teachers that opportunity to get some positive attention and feedback, and then sharing these experiences and hoping that everyone learns from them.
Thank you, Dr. Brummett. I really appreciate your candor and your very clear sense of the direction that you want the Newington Public Schools to move forward with by sparking all of the innovations and strategies that you've offered our audience. So thank you. We would like to move Michelle or Tanya to Q&A if there are any questions from the audience.
Wonderful. And you can feel free to write them in the chat if you do have them, or you can raise your hand. But while we're giving folks some time to digest, just a big thank you to both of you for this really fruitful and helpful conversation. I recently attended a webinar by the federal USED, and one of the things they talked about is it's going to take a community-wide effort for us to accelerate learning and to support our students. And from hearing you speak, I see this as almost threefold: community-wide, meaning your learning community, so the folks that you work with, your greater community, those community-based organizations, and then this group right here across the state, the educator community of Connecticut. And that's what we're so grateful that you joined us in this space, because this is just step one of really making the most out of ARP-ESSER. A reminder that on August 16th, the applications are due. It's a rolling basis, so you're welcome to turn them in earlier, but use as much time as you need to be thoughtful and to pull in this coherence as we just talked about today. And I'll just drop it again. There's a link in the chat for you, which is where you will find all the recordings of the various Spark Innovation webinars, as well as the one-pagers. So if you're having a hard time trying to figure out where you're going, feel free to check those out, because I really do think we're all in this together, and we have a great opportunity for folks to look back and say, oh, you remember that money? That really changed things. It transformed our school system. So with that, we'll leave it for questions, but if you have to jump to other meetings, we appreciate your time and your focus and attention with us today. But I will stop talking and see if folks have questions.
And while we're waiting for any questions to come in, one thing I forgot to mention is the research around PLCs has been updated, and now they're saying that you can really see change in a year if you apply those practices well. So that's very encouraging to me, because I know people have a hard time if things don't happen right away. And I mean, I know people are going to work hard. So my hope and my encouragement to staff is, hey, if we really put these to practice, we will see a change in a school year. And if we keep it up year after year, we will see bigger changes. But I think that's an important point for folks as they come back from a challenge like we've had, is, you know, let's see some big wins right away, which is what I'm hoping.
Would you mind sharing the name of the book? We have a question of what is the book you've been referencing?
You got it. It's called, see if you can see it, Revisiting Professional Learning Communities at Work, and it's by the Dufours, as well as some of the other folks that they work with over the years, Eker, Matos, and Mohammed. So I got it on Amazon, and I've ordered one of these for every member of my administrative team. So we're all reading through it.
I also really love how that is an example of modeling change and transformation, and it's something that even at the state level we're really pushing for. Is if we're asking you all to be reimagining and to transform, we need to do the same. And I feel like if we're asking our students or teachers to do that, then it's great to model that. So thank you for sharing that example, Dr. Brummett. I think it's very powerful. All right, well, we are at time. And again, we know a lot of you are eating, which is great, and taking this moment to learn and to take care of yourself. And thank you, because this is one of the most wild years we've had as a country, and especially as educators. And so thank you for your dedication to making the most out of this opportunity we have with ARP-ESSER funding. You can reach out if you have any questions. The email inbox is the word I'm looking for, is still open, sde.arpesser@ct.gov. And we're here to support you, and we hope that you'll join us next week. It's going to be really interesting. We're going to talk about attendance and engagement on Tuesday, and then Thursday about engaging with families and communities, because that's such a key piece to making all of this work and sustainably work for many years to come. Thank you so much, Dr. Stoltz and Dr. Brummett. We are so grateful for your time and being in community with you. And thank you all for joining us. We will hopefully see you again on Tuesday or Thursday of next week.
Thank you,
Take care, everyone.
Tanya.
Be well.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Alan,
Brummett.
for all your support. Take care. Bye-bye.